What would you do if you discovered that a civilization extinct for centuries still influences your daily life? We are not talking about fiction, but about the Aztecs, whose legacy continues to surprise the modern world in ways few could imagine. In this deep and revealing exploration, you will learn about 29 wonders of the Aztec Empire that not only defined their civilization, but also left a mark that science, history, and contemporary culture are still trying to decipher. From the complexity of their hydraulic engineering to the precision of their calendars, from the educational philosophy of their schools to the not yet fully understood secrets of their religious rituals, the Aztec world is a box of wonders that challenges the limits of Western knowledge. Let's begin with their mythical foundation, the vision of the eagle devouring a snake on a nopal, guiding the Mexicas to the sacred place where they would build Tenochtitlan, today Mexico City. It was not a simple settlement, but a masterpiece of urban planning, built on artificial islands in the middle of a lake, with elevated roads, navigable canals, and drainage systems that rival those of modern cities. One of their greatest achievements was the development of chinampas, handmade floating gardens to grow food in the lake. Their agricultural efficiency was such that they are still used in Xochimilco. How did this civilization manage to dominate the most hostile environments? With knowledge, adaptability, and a worldview that united nature, divinity, and civic duty. The Aztec calendar is another marvel. Based on solar and ritual cycles, it was so accurate that it surpassed some European models by centuries. It was not just a tool for measuring time, but a spiritual guide that marked every human act within the cosmic order. The architecture of their temples, such as the Templo Mayor, was not only monumental, but deeply symbolic. Each step, each orientation had a religious and astronomical meaning. The Aztecs developed a mandatory educational system for men and women, something unusual in the pre-modern world. The Telpochcali and the Calmecac trained young people in values, history, religion, mathematics, and military art, preparing both warriors and priests and leaders. Their legal system was surprisingly advanced, with codified laws, judges, and even appeals, something that contradicts the prejudice of a purely warlike culture. But yes, there was also the dark side: human sacrifices. Although they shock us, they had a deep internal logic. Blood was the energy that fed the universe, and the gods required that offering to maintain cosmic balance. It was a reciprocity between the human and the divine, not simple cruelty. Even in this, the Aztecs had rules, specific rituals, and a sacrificial aesthetic that sought to transcend suffering. In art, the Aztecs dazzled with sculptures like the Sunstone and Coatlicue, works full of symbolism, power, and a disturbing beauty. They used obsidian to create mirrors that are believed to have been used for divination and spiritual connection, a spiritual technology we are only beginning to understand. In medicine, they used more than 1,000 medicinal plants, many of which are still studied today for their effectiveness. Markets like that of Tlatelolco were centers of exchange that amazed the Spanish conquerors. Orderly, regulated, with a variety of products ranging from food and textiles to jewelry, weapons, and exotic animals. Aztec social organization was not chaotic. There was a structured hierarchy, but with social mobility through merit and service to the state. The Aztec religion was not a static system, but a living field of interpretation, with deities like Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl, and Tlaloc representing not only divine aspects, but also forces of psychology and nature. Feather art, made with feathers of exotic birds, was so refined that pieces like Moctezuma's headdress still baffle with their technical perfection. And what about their communication system? They used pictographic codices and a body of messengers, the Temimis, who traveled great distances on foot transmitting messages, news, and tributes between regions of the empire. Through their conquests, the Aztecs expanded an empire of alliances rather than direct domination, allowing many peoples to preserve their language and customs in exchange for tribute, in a politically efficient control model for their time. This balance between centralization and autonomy is one of the reasons why the empire grew so rapidly. However, this same system also generated resentment among the tributary peoples, which was exploited by the Spanish conquerors to fracture the unity of the empire. The fall of the Aztecs was not only due to weapons, but also to diseases brought by Europeans, such as smallpox, which wiped out millions of indigenous people without immunity, devastating the demographic and social structure. But although their capital fell, their culture did not die. It lives in the Nahuatl language, still spoken by millions of Mexicans, in place names, in the syncretized rituals of the Day of the Dead, in food, in traditional medicine, and in the collective memory of a people that refuses to disappear. This is just an introduction to the astonishing Aztec world, a civilization that, far from being a dusty memory of the past, continues speaking to us with strength and relevance. In the following parts, we will explore each of these wonders in more depth, unraveling the secrets that still amaze us today and invite us to rethink what we think we know about history. The awe before the Aztec civilization does not fade with a simple superficial glance. On the contrary, the more one investigates, the more impressive their legacy becomes. Let's begin this second part by exploring one of the lesser-known gems, their mastery of hydraulics. In a lacustrine terrain, where rains were intense and water as abundant as it was potentially destructive, the Aztecs designed dikes, gates, and aqueducts like the one in Chapultepec, which supplied drinking water to the entire city of Tenochtitlan through elevated canals. This engineering feat, carried out without modern tools or draft animals, is a testament to Aztec technical ingenuity. Another surprising example of innovation is their drainage system. When floods threatened the city, they used a combination of underground canals and strategic elevations that allowed the natural flow of water, adapting the city to environmental conditions. But not everything was infrastructure. We must also talk about the spiritual depth of their worldview. For the Aztecs, the universe was divided into multiple levels: the upper world, where certain gods lived, the earthly world, and the underworld known as Mictlan. This last was not hell in the Christian sense, but a place of trial, transformation, and final destination for most souls. This concept demonstrates a complex existential vision. Life was not linear or final, but a continuous cycle of death, rebirth, and balance. This same principle inspired their religious ceremonies, among them those dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of rain, whose worship included water rituals and sacrifices related to fertility. In terms of food, the Aztecs already practiced a diet based on corn, beans, chili, and amaranth, foods that today form the basis of the Mesoamerican diet and are globally recognized for their nutritional value. They also domesticated the turkey, collected insects like escamoles, ant larvae, and prepared dishes like tamales or atole, which are still present in current Mexican cuisine. In education, the emphasis was not only on intellectual training, but also on discipline, oral memory, music, and dance. Schools were free, organized by the state, and mandatory, something that even many European societies of the same period did not offer. Regarding their art, beyond sculpture, the Aztecs excelled in the creation of codices, books made of amate paper or deerskin illustrated with natural colors, where they recorded genealogies, maps, religious rites, and historical events. Although many codices were destroyed during the conquest, those that have survived, like the Borgia Codex or the Mendoza Codex, offer a vibrant portrait of the Aztec worldview. Music was also essential in their culture. They used instruments such as the huehuetl, vertical drum, the teponaztli, slit drum, clay flutes, sea snails, and rattles in both religious and festive ceremonies. Music was not just entertainment. It was a form of communication with the gods and a tool for social cohesion. In textiles, cotton and maguey fiber were skillfully woven to create both utilitarian and ceremonial garments. Colors, patterns, and accessories indicated social rank, profession, and even marital status. Elite warriors, like jaguars and eagles, wore elaborate suits made of skins, feathers, and embroidery that were not only intimidating, but also symbols of spiritual power. Another astonishing achievement was astronomical observation. The Aztecs knew how to identify solstices, equinoxes, and lunar phases, and aligned their temples and main plazas according to these phenomena. The Templo Mayor, for example, is aligned with the exact point where the sun rises on the equinoxes, thus marking key moments of the agricultural and religious calendar. Their medicine is also notable, including treatments with plants such as epazote, sage, toloache, and the use of temazcales, steam baths, to cleanse the body and spirit. They had knowledge of minor surgery, childbirth, infections, and chronic diseases, and their doctors were recognized as specialists who followed formal training and strict ethics. All this was supported by a highly functional economy. Unlike Europe, the Aztecs did not use coins, but a regulated barter system and standardized products such as cocoa, which served as a unit of value. Markets were supervised by judges, and counterfeiting or commercial abuse were severely punished. Wealth was not frowned upon, but selfishness and corruption were. Finally, we cannot fail to mention their ability to integrate various peoples into a political federation. The so-called Triple Alliance was a coalition between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, which allowed the distribution of power and resources according to diplomatic, military, and economic agreements. This federation, despite its internal tensions, was extraordinarily effective in consolidating power in the Valley of Mexico. Upon observing these wonders, one cannot help but wonder how this civilization would have evolved if it had not been abruptly interrupted by the conquest. History is not only about what was, but also about what could have been. And the Aztecs, with their balance between science, spirituality, art, and political power, show us that another form of civilization was possible and still resonates in the heart of America. As we delve deeper into the Aztec legacy, we discover that their greatness was not only measured in pyramids or codices, but in the sophistication with which they wove every aspect of their society. One of the most astonishing wonders is the Aztec concept of time and destiny, expressed through the Tonalpohualli, a sacred 260-day calendar that combined 20 signs with 13 numbers, forming a spiritual matrix that governed not only religious festivities, but also births, marriages, agricultural cycles, and political decisions. For them, each day had a particular energy, a cosmic force that influenced events and the character of individuals. This deterministic vision was not passive, but a tool to harmonize with the universe. Priests specialized in the calendar, known as tonalpuque, were consulted to interpret these signs and guide the daily life of the population. This deep knowledge of time reveals a worldview where the spiritual, the mathematical, and the social were intimately intertwined. Continuing with the political structure, it is fascinating that the Aztec ruler, the Tlatoani, was not an absolute monarch in the European sense. Although he held great power, he had to be elected by a council of nobles and priests, and his conduct was constantly evaluated. He could be deposed if he failed in his duties or lost divine favor. This system, though limited in popular participation, already implied a notion of responsibility and governance based on merit and tradition. Additionally, the Aztecs had a complex network of local officials, judges, tax collectors, and administrators that ensured the functioning of a vast and diverse empire. This administrative structure was accompanied by effective diplomacy. They knew when to use force and when to negotiate, sending ambassadors, gifts, and veiled threats to achieve their goals. Another lesser-known wonder is their respect for oratory. Speaking well was an essential virtue, and young people were trained in the art of speech from an early age. The Huehuetlatoli, ancestral speeches passed down from generation to generation, served as moral, philosophical, and educational guides. These texts spoke of humility, respect for parents, the importance of work, and connection with the land. In a world where the word was sacred, silence also had value. Political and religious meetings included moments of contemplation, showing a wisdom that today seems advanced. The power of thought before speaking. In the military sphere, the Aztecs were feared and respected. Their army was not only powerful but structured and professionalized. They had defined ranks, elite corps, insignias, constant training, and organized tactics. War was seen as a way to maintain the balance of the universe and obtain prisoners for ritual sacrifices. But it was not an irrational act. The Aztecs respected certain rules of combat and formed alliances with other peoples to avoid unnecessary wars. The Flower War, a ritualized form of conflict, shows that even combat had a symbolic and religious character. Regarding spirituality, the Aztecs did not see gods as distant beings, but as living forces present in every aspect of existence. The Aztec pantheon was complex and dynamic. Deities like Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, represented knowledge, creation, and duality, while Tezcatlipoca, his dark counterpart, symbolized power, war, and transformation. They were not irreconcilable opposites, but complementary forces. This notion of duality ran through all of Aztec culture: day and night, life and death, order and chaos. In their rituals, they sought to maintain the balance between these poles. That is why sacrifice was not an act of barbarity, but a vital offering to keep the world in motion. In this sense, sacrifice had an internal logic that responded to a deeply developed cosmic philosophy. In funerary art, the Aztecs practiced burial with personal objects, food, jewelry, and symbolic figures that accompanied the deceased on their journey to Mictlan. This journey was not easy. It consisted of 9 levels, full of obstacles that the soul had to overcome before reaching final rest. This path reflects a vision of death as transformation, not as an end. The memory of the deceased was honored in festivities such as Michaelhuitontli, the direct predecessor of today's Day of the Dead. This type of cultural continuity is another of the most striking wonders. How a millennial tradition managed to survive colonization, adapting and merging with Christian elements to keep the connection with ancestors alive. In agriculture, besides the chinampas, the Aztecs mastered techniques such as crop rotation, fertilization with volcanic ash, and observation of lunar cycles for planting and harvesting. Respect for the land was absolute, and the deity Tlazolteotl, goddess of fertility and purification, was invoked to thank for the harvests and ask forgiveness for excesses. In this bond with nature, an avant-garde ecological thought is revealed, which today inspires environmental movements in Mexico and other parts of the world. Finally, it is worth highlighting their capacity for cultural resistance. Despite the systematic attempt at destruction during the conquest, the Aztecs managed to preserve essential fragments of their identity through oral transmission, religious syncretism, and the integration of their language and symbols into the social fabric of New Spain. That resistance is not only a testimony of pain, but also of wisdom. In every traditional dance, in every Nahuatl word, in every ancestral dish, lives a civilization that refuses to die. That is why speaking of the Aztec wonders is not only looking at the past, but also recognizing their living presence in our present. With each new facet of the Aztec legacy we explore, it becomes more evident that this civilization was ahead of its time in multiple dimensions. One of the most eloquent manifestations of their genius is found in the urban design of Tenochtitlan, which was not only a magnificent city in its aesthetics, but functional, strategic, and respectful of the environment. Built in the middle of Lake Texcoco, this city was connected by causeways that extended like arms over the water, allowing the constant flow of people, goods, and tributes. Its navigable canals, similar to those of Venice, facilitated internal transport and gave a resplendent appearance to the city. The houses, made of adobe and stone, were organized into neighborhoods or calpulas, where each community had its own temple, school, and mutual aid system. This community model fostered solidarity, collective discipline, and self-sufficiency. Additionally, each calpulli had communal lands worked by all its members, and the fruits were distributed equitably. In this sense, the Aztec economic system had redistributive components that we would associate today with advanced social models. Symbolically, the city was a representation of the cosmos. At the center stood the Templo Mayor, the spiritual and political heart of the empire, aligned with the cardinal points and astronomical cycles. This design was not accidental. It represented the interconnection between humans, gods, and the earth. The Templo Mayor, dedicated simultaneously to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, reflected the fundamental duality between war and fertility, sacrifice and abundance. Climbing its steps was more than a physical act. It was an ascent toward the divine. The city, with its botanical gardens, markets, schools, observatories, and ceremonial centers, was a microcosm of the universe. The respect that the Aztecs had for nature also stands out. They considered that each natural element had a spirit or vital energy, what we would now call animism. They did not cut down trees without a ceremony, did not hunt without thanking the gods, did not fish without offering tribute to the water guardians. This level of ecological awareness, based on reciprocity with the earth, contrasts deeply with modern extractive models. Another impressive aspect is their tax system. Contrary to what is believed, tribute was not only an imposition, it was also a sacred pact. Allied or conquered peoples delivered products such as blankets, cacao, corn, obsidian, feathers, jewelry, or animals, not only as a sign of submission, but as a contribution to the general balance of the empire. These tributes were meticulously recorded by specialized scribes using pictograms in codices and counting volumes through knots in cords, similar to the Andean Quaipu system. The administration was so detailed that some historians compare it to modern bureaucracies. In the field of law, the Aztecs managed a legal system that distinguished between minor and major crimes. Penalties were proportional to the crime and could range from community work to capital punishment. But there was also the figure of ritual forgiveness, where the accused could be absolved if delivered to the priests before being officially reported. This possibility offered a path to redemption that, paradoxically, made collective morality stricter. On gender issues, although the society was patriarchal, women had fundamental roles. They could be merchants, healers, priestesses, educators, and even landowners. In the home, the woman was seen as the center of the sacred fire, responsible for feeding both the body and spirit of the family. In mythologies, goddesses like Coatlicue, Chalchiutlicue, or Chihuahuatl had as much power as their male counterparts, showing a symbolic balance between the masculine and the feminine. This integration of the feminine into the spiritual and social structure challenges many of the stereotypes imposed by colonial views. Regarding childhood, the Aztecs deeply valued education from an early age. Children were introduced to household tasks, agriculture, singing, dancing, and text memorization. Girls learned to spin, weave, cook, and participate in family ceremonies. This training was comprehensive. It did not separate mind and body, nor knowledge from practice. The elderly, for their part, were considered sources of wisdom. Their advice was listened to with reverence, and in community decisions their voice was decisive. In religious festivities, they occupied places of honor. This intergenerational respect is another sign of the human depth of Aztec culture. Among the wonders that still arouse astonishment is the Aztec civilization's ability to maintain cultural cohesion despite its ethnic diversity. The empire was not homogeneous. It encompassed peoples with different languages, customs, and traditions. However, they managed to create a shared identity through the use of Nahuatl as a lingua franca, the imposition of common ritual calendars, and collective participation in imperial festivals. This integration did not eliminate differences, but harmonized them. In this way, the Aztecs built a cultural mosaic that respected diversity without losing unity. That formula, complex but functional, is undoubtedly one of the great political wonders of the pre-Hispanic world. In this final stretch of our journey through the wonders of the Aztec Empire, we must pause to contemplate not only their material legacy, but also the intangible impact they have left on the collective consciousness, on the living culture of millions of people who, sometimes unknowingly, continue walking along the invisible threads woven by their ancestors. One of the most powerful testimonies of this heritage is the persistence of Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, which today is still spoken by more than 1.5 million people in Mexico. It is not just a language, but a worldview encapsulated in words, in metaphors that name rain as a divine gift, the heart as a smoking mirror, and life as a flower that sings. In native languages, thought blooms differently, and Nahuatl still preserves that sacred breath of the ancient Tlatoanes, the wise ones who knew how to speak and listen to the universe. This linguistic survival is a wonder of resistance and dignity. Another profound legacy is the religious syncretism that allowed many Aztec customs to integrate into colonial Christianity without losing their essence. The Day of the Dead, for example, preserves clearly Mexica practices. The altar with flowers, candles, food, and photographs is an echo of Micallhuitontli. The belief in a return of souls, the use of copal, sugar skulls, and ritualized music are hybrid expressions that still worship death as continuity and not as an end. This ability to absorb without disappearing, to transform without forgetting, is another of the silent wonders that the Mexica people left us. In the artistic realm, Aztec iconography has even influenced contemporary movements such as Mexican muralism, Chicano art in the United States, and modern indigenous fashion. The colors, symbols, geometric shapes inspired by codices and temples constantly reappear in visual creations that try to reconnect with an ancestral root. Moctezuma's headdress, for example, is not just a piece of exotic feathers, but a symbol of identity that continues to generate debate and emotion on both sides of the Atlantic. Its symbolic return to Mexico would be an act of historical reconciliation. Agricultural practices such as the use of chinampas are also maintained in areas of Xochimilco, not just as a tourist attraction, but as a viable model of sustainable agriculture. These floating plots, which combine technique, ecological intuition, and respect for natural cycles, have been studied by modern ecologists as an alternative to the collapse of industrial systems. Regenerative agriculture, small-space farming, circular water use, and organic fertilizers were already practiced by the Aztecs, with a success that today is inspiring. In gastronomy, corn, cacao, chili, amaranth, and avocado, all central foods in the Aztec diet, are today considered superfoods for their nutritional properties. Mole, atole, tamales, pozole, hot chocolate, and even the ritual use of pulque reflect a complex cuisine, rich in flavors, colors, and symbolism. Each food had a sacred role. Corn was not only nourishment, but a child of the gods. Cacao was currency and ceremonial drink. Pulque was the link between mortals and the gods of mystical intoxication. Aztec cuisine, in this sense, was cultural and spiritual alchemy. The impact of the Aztecs even extends to modern urbanism. Mexico City, built on the remains of Tenochtitlan, still preserves in its streets, avenues, and neighborhoods vestiges of the ancient Mexica layout. Some subway stations bear Nahuatl names. Traditional dances are still performed in the Zocalo. And from time to time, the volcanoes Iztaccíhuatl and Popocatépetl are wrapped in mysticism when their silhouette cuts across the dawn. Even social justice and the struggle for indigenous rights find in the Aztecs a powerful symbol of original dignity. Indigenous communities, historical memory collectives, cultural activists, and urban artists rescue their legacy to build discourses of identity and resistance. In murals, in festivals, in poetry, in cinema, and in bilingual education, the Aztec spirit rises again as a beacon in the midst of a world that has forgotten the value of memory. And isn't this one of the most important wonders? That a civilization, despite having been devastated by violence, disease, and colonization, has managed to plant such fertile seeds that they still bloom. That their ideas, symbols, words, flavors, maps of the sky and earth continue to guide millions of people. That they keep reminding us that another way of seeing the world was possible, and perhaps still is. That is why the 29 wonders of the Aztec Empire we have explored are not dead relics, but burning flames. They speak to us from the stone and the codex, from the altar and the offering, from the song and the dance. They invite us to remember that knowledge can take the shape of myth, that science can have the face of a god, and that the heart of a people, when it beats strongly, can transcend the centuries. Thus ends this journey, but another begins. The one of rediscovering with new eyes what the ancients already knew, that everything is connected, that we are earth, song, fire, and memory, that in the ashes of the past lie the seeds of the future. And so, as we finish this journey through the 29 wonders of the Aztec Empire, we do not merely walk away from an extinct civilization, but draw closer, with humility and awe, to a different way of understanding existence. The Aztecs were not perfect, as no culture is, but their way of intertwining spirituality, science, art, and social organization made them one of the most advanced, complex, and resilient civilizations in history. Despite the brutality with which they were conquered, despite attempts to erase their memory, their spirit persists in the corners of the Nahuatl language, in the songs of indigenous peoples, in the symbols that decorate plazas, in the flowers placed on Day of the Dead altars, in calendars that still respect the solstice, in words we use without knowing they are Mexica heritage, like chocolate, tomato, coyote, mezcal. Their legacy is in the land, in the names of the volcanoes, in the voices of those who remember, of those who resist, of those who teach. But it is also in those who learn, in those who listen, in those who, like you, take the time to look beyond what school books said. The Aztec Empire should not be seen only as a glorious episode of the past, nor solely as a victim of colonialism, but as a living source of inspiration for the present and the future. In a world fragmented by the loss of collective meaning, the Aztecs teach us that it is possible to build strong, educated, organized communities deeply connected to their natural and spiritual environment. In an era marked by noise, they valued silence. In a society obsessed with speed, they measured time with sacred respect. In a system where everything is bought and sold, they offered their blood to maintain the balance of the universe. This is not about romanticizing or idealizing, but about learning, about understanding that there were, and still are, other ways of looking at the sky, of understanding the soul, of naming the world. And those ways are still here, alive in every offering, in every codex, in every word that crosses the centuries to reach us. The 29 wonders we have shared are open windows, invitations to dive into a universe that has not disappeared, but waits to be remembered with respect, with curiosity, and with love. Because remembering the Aztecs is not only looking back, but looking deeply within. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this journey made you reflect, learn, or see the world with new eyes, we invite you to leave your comment, share this video with someone else, and continue exploring with us the hidden wonders of civilizations that, although silenced, still have much to say. See you soon, and may the heart of the sun, still burning above ancient Tenochtitlan, light your path. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another interesting one.